December 2020, gamers around the world eagerly awaited the release of Cyberpunk 2077, a game that promised to revolutionize the open-world genre. With its breathtaking visuals, immersive gameplay, and captivating storyline.
Confusion.
Cyberpunk 2077 was a dumpster fire, possibly the worst release known to man. What followed was a catastrophic chain of events that led to one of the biggest gaming disasters in recent times. In this video, we'll explore what went wrong with Cyberpunk 2077 and how it went from being the most anticipated game of the year to a cautionary tale of corporate greed and broken promises. Cyberpunk 2077, the game that promised to take us to the future, ended up being a blast from the past. A reminder of the days when games used to be released half-baked, incomplete, and utterly broken. Congratulations, CD Projekt Red. You've successfully taken us back to the 90s. Let's take a deep dive into the disaster that was Cyberpunk 2077 and explore the game's many flaws, glitches, and outright absurdities. From brain-dead NPCs...
I'm too young. Please. I'm too young.
to cars that drive themselves or not, this game had it all. And by all, I mean all the things that make you wonder how it even got released. So buckle up, folks, because this ride is going to be bumpy, glitchy, and downright hilarious. But first, are you subscribed? No? Everyone watching this video isn't subscribed, so please sub to the channel so I can feed my 50 children. Cyberpunk 2077 was first announced in 2012 by CD Projekt Red, the developers behind the acclaimed Witcher series of video games. The Witcher game series is widely regarded as one of the best RPG franchises of all time. The series was based on the novels by Polish author Andrzej Sapkowski, and the games took place in a fantasy world filled with monsters, magic, and political intrigue. The first game in the series, The Witcher, was released in 2007 and was a critical and commercial success. It won several awards for its story, characters, and gameplay mechanics, and it set the stage for the even more successful sequels that followed. The Witcher 2, Assassins of Kings was released in 2011 and was praised for its improved graphics, refined gameplay mechanics, and complex storyline. It was also a commercial success, selling over 2 million copies worldwide. The Witcher 3, Wild Hunt, released in 2015, was the most successful game in the series, selling over 30 million copies worldwide. It was praised for its incredible story, memorable characters, stunning graphics, and immersive open-world gameplay. The game won numerous awards, including Game of the Year, and is still considered one of the best RPGs ever made. The success of the Witcher game series was a major factor in the hype and anticipation surrounding Cyberpunk 2077. Fans had high expectations for CD Projekt Red's next game, and they were eagerly awaiting its release. Cyberpunk 2077 was announced with a flashy cinematic trailer that showed off the game's futuristic setting, characters, and themes. The hype surrounding the game grew rapidly, and fans eagerly anticipated its release. CD Projekt Red promised an open-world game that would be even more immersive and ambitious than their previous titles, with a sprawling city to explore, deep RPG mechanics, and a complex story. However, as development progressed, the game faced several significant problems. One of the most notable was the departure of key staff members from CD Projekt Red. In 2019, it was reported that the game's lead writer, Sebastian Steven, had left the company to work at Blizzard Entertainment. This was followed by the departure of the game's creative director, Sebastian Sjöstrand, and the game's narrative director, Mateusz Tomaszkiewicz. The departures of these key staff members raised concerns among fans about the game's development and whether it would live up to its promises. CD Projekt Red attempted to assuage these concerns by reassuring fans that the game was still on track and that the departures would not impact its quality. However, as the game's release date approached, it became clear that the game was facing significant technical issues. CD Projekt Red had promised that the game would run smoothly on both last generation and current generation consoles, but early previews and leaks suggested that this was not the case. The game's release was ultimately delayed several times, with the final release date set for December 10th, 2020. However, even after the delays, the game still faced significant technical issues and performance problems on last-generation consoles. The game was almost unplayable on some platforms, with frame rates dropping to single digits and frequent crashes. The game's release was widely criticized by fans and reviewers, who accused CD Projekt Red of misleading them about the game's quality and technical performance. The company's stock price also suffered, with investors losing faith in the company's ability to deliver on its promises. The early development of Cyberpunk 2077 was marked by high expectations and significant technical issues. The departure of key staff members and the game's delayed release raised concerns among fans about its quality, and these concerns were ultimately validated by the game's problematic launch. The game was supposed to be a revolutionary masterpiece, a genre-defining experience that would take open-world gaming to new heights. CD Projekt Red, the studio behind The Witcher 3, had set the bar high with their previous game, and fans expected nothing less from their next project. But the hype machine was not the only thing that fueled the anticipation for Cyberpunk 2077. The game's marketing campaign was masterful, featuring breathtaking visuals, engaging gameplay footage, and a star-studded cast that included Keanu Reeves. The game was marketed as the ultimate dystopian future simulator, where players could live out their wildest cyberpunk fantasies in a rich and immersive world. And then the game was released.
In 2077, they voted my city the worst place to live in America. Main issues: sky-high rate of violence, and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else. Can't deny it, it's all true. But everybody still wants to live here. This city's always got a promise for you. Might be a lie, an illusion, but it's there, just around the corner, and it keeps you going. It's a city of dreams, and I'm a big dreamer.
The game was riddled with issues that ranged from annoying to downright hilarious. Let's take a look at some of the game's most notorious glitches. NPCs stuck in walls, running into each other, or just standing still, staring at you blankly. The game's AI was so bad that it made the world feel lifeless and unengaging. Cars randomly veering off the road, crashing into buildings or exploding for no apparent reason. Driving in Cyberpunk 2077 was like playing a game of Russian roulette every time you got behind the wheel. Enemies taking an absurd amount of damage to kill, and the gunplay feeling like shooting marshmallows at a wall. The combat was clunky and unresponsive, making it frustrating and a chore to play. Quests being plagued with bugs that would prevent you from progressing or completing them. This made it impossible to enjoy the game's story, which was supposed to be one of its strongest aspects. These and other gameplay issues made Cyberpunk 2077 feel like a game that was rushed to release without proper testing or quality control. It was like playing an alpha version of a game that was supposed to be a polished masterpiece. Let's not forget the visual glitches that plagued the game, like characters' faces melting or stretching like putty, weapons disappearing or floating in mid-air, and textures failing to load correctly, making the world look like a fever dream. But the bugs and glitches weren't the only things that made Cyberpunk 2077 a disaster. The game was also plagued by a lack of features that were promised in pre-release marketing, like the ability to customize your character's appearance after starting the game, or the dynamic weather system that was supposed to affect the gameplay. And then there were the design choices that left players scratching their heads. For example, the game featured a romance system that allowed players to pursue sexual relationships with NPCs, but it was poorly implemented and felt like a shallow and exploitative addition to the game. The game's brain dance feature, which was supposed to be a revolutionary way to experience memories and events in the game world, felt clunky and unintuitive. And the game's much-touted Night City Wire feature, which was supposed to be a live stream showcasing new content and features, turned out to be a boring and uninformative marketing ploy. Cyberpunk 2077 was a disaster from top to bottom, with broken gameplay, missing features, and design choices that left players scratching their heads. It was a game that was hyped up beyond belief, only to come crashing down in flames upon release. The fallout from Cyberpunk 2077's disastrous release was swift and brutal. Fans and critics alike panned the game for its many flaws, and CD Projekt Red's stock price plummeted. The studio was forced to issue apologies and refunds, and even faced lawsuits from angry investors. The backlash backlash was so severe that Sony even pulled the game from its PlayStation Store. But the story doesn't end there. CD Projekt Red promised to fix the game's many issues with a series of patches and updates. And while some of these updates did improve the game, they also introduced new glitches and bugs. The game's development was plagued by mismanagement, crunch, and unrealistic deadlines. It was a textbook case of how not to make a game. The aftermath of Cyberpunk 2077's release was a cautionary tale for the gaming industry. It showed that hype and marketing can only take a game so far, and that quality control and testing are essential for a successful release. It also showed that developers and publishers need to respect their audience and not release unfinished, broken games. CD Projekt Red eventually released several patches and updates for Cyberpunk 2077, fixing many of the game's issues. But the damage had already been done, and the game's reputation had been irreparably tarnished. The game's release was not only a financial disaster, but also a PR nightmare that left many gamers feeling disillusioned. The controversy surrounding the game's release highlighted many of the issues that plague the gaming industry. One of the most significant problems was the practice of crunch, which involves forcing employees to work long hours and weekends to meet unrealistic deadlines. This practice not only takes a toll on the mental and physical health of developers, but also leads to rushed, unfinished products. Furthermore, Cyberpunk 2077's release demonstrated the importance of transparency and honesty in the gaming industry. Many gamers felt betrayed by CD Projekt Red's promises and marketing hype, and the studio's subsequent apologies and refunds were seen by some as too little, too late. The incident highlighted the need for developers and publishers to be open and honest with their audiences about the state of their games. Cyberpunk 2077 was a hilariously terrible game that failed to live up to the hype and hysteria that surrounded its release. Its many bugs, glitches, and gameplay issues made it feel like a game that was rushed to release without proper testing and quality control. CD Projekt Red's mismanagement and unrealistic deadlines only added to the game's problems, and the fallout from its disastrous release was severe. But despite all its flaws, Cyberpunk 2077 will go down in gaming history as a cautionary tale, a reminder that developers and publishers need to respect their audience and deliver quality products. Let's hope that the gaming industry learns from the mistakes made by CD Projekt Red and doesn't repeat them in the future. And who knows, maybe one day we'll get a Cyberpunk 2077 that lives up to its promise. But until then, let's just enjoy the hilariously terrible game that we got. The game was plagued with a myriad of issues, from performance problems and glitches to gameplay mechanics that simply didn't work as intended. The game's open world was stunning to look at, but it was largely devoid of meaningful content. NPCs were lifeless and lacked any sort of depth or personality, making the game world feel hollow and uninteresting. One of the biggest issues with Cyberpunk 2077 was its bugs and glitches. Players encountered a seemingly endless stream of issues, from visual glitches and audio problems to game-breaking bugs that made progress impossible. Some players reported that the game was virtually unplayable on certain platforms, such as the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One, due to poor optimization and low frame rates. But it wasn't just the technical issues that made Cyberpunk 2077 such a disappointment. The game also failed to live up to its promise in terms of gameplay and story. The game's main storyline was short and lacked any real depth, and the side quests felt repetitive and lacked any real impact on the game world. The game's RPG elements felt shallow and poorly implemented, and the game's combat was often frustrating and unengaging. CD Projekt Red's response to the game's many issues was also disappointing. The studio initially tried to downplay the problems, claiming that the game was running smoothly on all platforms. But as players continued to report issues, the studio was forced to issue a series of apologies and refunds. The backlash from fans and investors was severe, and the studio's stock price plummeted in the aftermath of the game's release. Despite all these issues, CD Projekt Red continued to promise that they would fix the game's many problems with a series of patches and updates. And while some of these updates did improve the game, they also introduced new issues and problems. The game's development was plagued by mismanagement, crunch, and unrealistic deadlines, which only added to the game's issues. The aftermath of Cyberpunk 2077's release was a cautionary tale for the gaming industry. It showed that hype and marketing can only take a game so far, and that quality control and testing are essential for a successful release. It also showed that developers and publishers need to respect their audience and not release unfinished, broken games. The studio's response to the game's issues was slow and inadequate. CD Projekt Red promised that they would fix the game's many problems with a series of patches and updates. And while some of these updates did improve the game, they also introduced new issues and problems. The game's development was plagued by mismanagement, crunch, and unrealistic deadlines, which only added to the game's issues. Reports later emerged of CD Projekt Red's developers being overworked and underpaid, with the studio putting profits before the well-being of its employees. In the end, the fallout from Cyberpunk 2077's release served as a cautionary tale for the gaming industry. It showed that developers and publishers must prioritize quality over hype, and that crunch and unrealistic deadlines can lead to disastrous results. As gamers, we can only hope that the industry learns from these mistakes and takes steps to ensure that future releases are polished, bug-free, and respectful of their audience.